The scent of a possessive alpha clung to Leo Sullivan, a cloying, indelible mark that announced to the world he was claimed. His colleague, Ryan, leaned over the cubicle wall, his expression a theatrical mix of gossip and feigned concern. He remarked that Leo's alpha was certainly territorial, suggesting Leo must have been thoroughly marinated in pheromones all weekend. The after-effects of being pinned down by that very alpha until the early morning hours were starting to show. It took Leo a moment to process Ryan's insinuation. Seeing Leo's pallid, exhausted state, Ryan's lips twisted into a knowing smirk, teasing that Leo must have had quite an eventful couple of days. Leo opened his mouth to object, but the intense, curious gleam in Ryan's eyes made his scalp tingle. He tried to insist that it wasn't what Ryan was thinking, but his defense was weak. Ryan, a man whose lifeblood was office chatter, waved off the denial. He said he understood that they were all adults here. His tone shifted, a flicker of genuine curiosity in his voice as he wondered aloud if the boss knew about Leo's supposed boyfriend. Ryan and the others had noticed, he confided, that Mr. Vance seemed unusually attentive to Leo. Leo managed a strained smile, a bitter irony coiling in his stomach. There was no need for the boss to know. The man who had branded him with that potent, inescapable scent was his boss, Julian Vance. Leo was just another corporate drone, a beta with a nondescript degree who had lucked into an assistant's job that paid just enough to survive in the city. 4 years ago, the company had been taken over by a new CEO. Julian Vance was an S-class alpha, impossibly tall with a lean, powerful build and sharp, aristocratic features that spoke of a European bloodline. He was the Vance family heir, freshly returned from his studies abroad, a true scion of wealth and power. On the day he arrived, the office had buzzed with speculation. The consensus, fueled by Ryan's dramatic whispers, was that a man that sculpted and intense was undoubtedly nursing a broken heart over some long-lost love. The kind of man who would seek out a substitute to fill the void. As Julian had made his first tour of the office, Ryan had nudged Leo, murmuring about such tragic, romantic figures. Leo had glanced at the man in question. His shirt was buttoned to the column of his throat, the crisp fabric hinting at the powerful chest beneath. His hands, with their prominent veins, hung loosely at his sides, exuding a quiet strength. To Leo, he was just another capitalist in a well-tailored suit. Still, to avoid seeming detached, he had muttered his agreement with Ryan's assessment, remarking that the most polished-looking ones were often the most depraved in private. In truth, he couldn't have cared less. His mind was consumed by a text message from his landlord, informing him of a rent hike he couldn't possibly afford. He was so preoccupied with trying to discreetly negotiate via text during the welcome meeting that he completely missed the deep, probing look the new CEO sent his way. That evening, nursing a glass of cheap whiskey on a park bench overlooking the river, the weight of his future pressing down on him, a sleek black town car pulled to a stop nearby. Julian Vance emerged, dressed in the same impeccable suit. He approached Leo, his expression unreadable, and asked if Leo would be willing to be with him. Leo's mind, fogged with alcohol and Ryan's lurid theories, jumped to the most obvious conclusion. He recoiled, his voice laced with indignation as he demanded to know what Julian took him for, declaring he would rather starve than sell his dignity. A flicker of confusion crossed Julian's face before it settled back into a neutral mask. He seemed to reconsider his approach. He noted that Leo had seemed unhappy at his job and made a new offer, $70,000 a month, simply to stay home and rest. The number sliced through Leo's drunken haze. $70,000 a month. The annual sum was staggering. The interest alone could sustain him for the rest of his life. His moral objections dissolved into thin air. He shot to his feet, profusely apologizing for his outburst. He eagerly accepted, asking when the arrangement would start and if the money could be transferred immediately. Julian hesitated for a fraction of a second, a look of profound surprise on his face, before a low, gentle laugh escaped him. He agreed that their arrangement would begin right then. Now, hiding in the office break room, Leo frantically sprayed himself with a pheromone neutralizer, cursing his own foolishness. Since moving into Julian's penthouse, every time the Alpha's rut approached, he would become like a massive, needy hound, clinging to Leo relentlessly. Leo had once thought him a man of restraint. Recalling the Alpha's smugly satisfied expression that morning, he seethed. He had told Julian countless times not to leave his scent on him, terrified of their unprofessional relationship being exposed. After ensuring he was as scent-free as possible, he crept back to his desk. A colleague passing by informed him that Mr. Vance wanted to see him in his office. He found the expansive room empty. A moment later, his phone lit up. 2 messages from Julian. One informed him that lunch from a Michelin-starred restaurant was on its way. The other told him to wait after he finished eating so they could go home together. Leo scoffed internally at the romantic gesture but obediently sat on the plush leather sofa to eat the gourmet meal. As he was finishing, he heard approaching footsteps and Julian's voice in the hallway. Julian was speaking with his assistant, Mr. Harrison, about someone named Caleb who would be returning soon. A primal, inexplicable panic seized Leo, and he dove under the massive mahogany desk just as the door opened. Julian stepped inside and paused, his eyes catching the barest flutter of a shirt cuff disappearing under the desk. Mr. Harrison, following behind, stopped short, his professional demeanor faltering for a second in sheer bewilderment. Julian, without missing a beat, calmly instructed his assistant to book a flight to Paris and to have his Orchard Estates property prepared. He then dismissed Harrison for the day. Alone in the room, Leo risked a glance from his hiding spot. His eyes traced the powerful line of a leg encased in fine wool trousers. A hot blush crept up his neck. Suddenly, a firm but gentle hand pressed down on his head, stilling his movements. A low, amused voice from above asked if he enjoyed the view from down there. Julian pulled him out from under the desk, his eyes alight with a teasing glint. He smoothed Leo's messy hair. Leo swatted his hand away, his protest weak. He accused Julian of orchestrating the entire scene, of sending his assistant away just to torment him. Julian's response was a swift, light kiss. Before Leo could form a coherent objection, the kiss deepened, becoming insistent and demanding. One of Julian's hands cradled the back of his head, while the other moved with practiced ease to the buttons of his shirt. As the heat in the room escalated, Leo's mind snagged on the name he had overheard. Caleb was coming back. His tenure as a placeholder was officially drawing to a close. The company-wide policy of ending the workday at 4:30 p.m. sharp, a rule instituted by Julian himself, meant the office emptied with startling efficiency. This, of course, left the vast, silent space to them. Afterward, Julian wrapped a boneless and exhausted Leo in his cashmere overcoat and carried him down to the car. At dinner, Leo ate with the desperation of a man on death row, savoring what he believed were his final luxurious meals. Julian watched him, his gaze intense and cryptic, an unreadable depth in his eyes that made Leo's heart flutter with a strange anxiety. It felt less like he was looking at a person and more like a predator observing its prey. Back at the penthouse, the moment the door closed, Julian's mouth was on his, hungry and impatient. As his hands roamed Leo's body, Leo pushed him away, breathless. He looked Julian in the eye and, with all the strength he could muster, made one final demand before his lover left to meet his old flame. He needed more money, $700,000. Julian, his own control fraying, agreed without hesitation. The next morning, Leo woke to an empty bed. Mr. Harrison was waiting for him in the living room, his expression impassive. He informed Leo that Mr. Vance was on his way to Paris for a week, and that he had been instructed to escort Leo to the residence at Orchard Estates for a temporary stay. The message was clear. The substitute had to make way for the original. Leo agreed, returning to the bedroom to pack. When he re-emerged, Mr. Harrison's composure finally cracked. Leo was dragging 4 enormous suitcases, followed by a large open duffel bag. The assistant's gaze fell upon the contents of the bag. It was filled with the gleam of solid gold bars. Years ago, Julian had advised him to invest, and the tip had paid off handsomely. Leo, slightly embarrassed, picked a heavy gold chain from the bag and tossed it to the assistant. "Mr." Harrison caught it deftly, pocketing it with a nod of solemn understanding before efficiently helping to move the rest of Leo's accumulated wealth. Before leaving, Leo placed a formal letter of resignation on the polished surface of the coffee table. He got into the waiting Rolls-Royce, feeling like a pampered stray being turned out into the street, and bid a silent farewell to Julian Vance. The house at Orchard Estates was palatial and empty, and a wave of melancholy washed over him. But a quick check of his bank account balance, now boasting 8 figures, served as a potent antidote. That evening, he treated Ryan to a meal at a classic American diner. Ryan was flabbergasted by Leo's sudden ability to casually throw money around. He mentioned that the rumor mill was churning again. The boss was supposedly bringing back a partner from his trip. Leo, certain he knew what this meant, sagely advised Ryan to prepare for the arrival of the new boss's wife. He described this person, based on the old rumors he'd clung to, as a gentle and beautiful Omega, a perfect childhood sweetheart match for Julian. Ryan shot him a quizzical look, pointing out that Leo's description sounded suspiciously like he was talking about himself. Leo just scoffed. He knew his role in the story, and it was never meant to be the lead. That night, a video call came through from Julian. He was fresh from a shower, a white robe hanging open to reveal the hard planes of his chest. He immediately began to question Leo, asking why he hadn't been in touch all day and accusing him of secretly spending all his money on video games. Leo steeled himself and told Julian that their contract was nearing its end and he wanted to discuss its termination. Julian's face darkened. He insisted they would talk when he returned. Just then, a cheerful voice called out Julian from off-screen. Before Julian could react, the phone was jostled and fell onto a sofa, the screen showing nothing but a ceiling. Leo heard Julian gently chiding someone named Connor, followed by the abrupt end of the call. He tried to call back, but the phone had been turned off. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Julian was with his beloved, and from the sound of it, he had no intention of letting Leo go. The thought of being kept on the side, a dirty little secret while Julian started his real life, was unbearable. In a fit of panic, he called Mr. Harrison, arranged for the rest of his things to be shipped to his family's old farmhouse in Ohio, and boarded the first train out of the city. Back in the quiet fields of Ohio, his mother fretted over him. He tried to laugh off her concerns, joking that the interest on his savings alone was more than a doctor's salary, which she dismissed as delusional nonsense. He found himself thinking of Julian's approaching rut, picturing him with Caleb, his supposed Omega love. He felt a pang he refused to name. To appease his mother, he agreed to a blind date. He put on a suit and drove to the only coffee shop in town. His date was a harmless-looking beta with nervous eyes. As Leo stood up to greet him, a sudden, sharp pain exploded at the base of his neck. The world tilted and spun, and as he fell into darkness, the last thing he saw was the distant figure of Mr. Harrison, dabbing his brow with a handkerchief and offering a small, apologetic nod. He awoke in an unfamiliar bed to the sound of 2 men bickering. One voice was young and bright, the other a low rumble. He groaned for them to be quiet. When he forced his eyes open, he saw them standing at the foot of his bed. One was boyish with a cherubic face. The other was a veritable giant, well over 6 feet tall, with a thick beard and the build of a linebacker. Assuming the baby-faced one must be Caleb, Leo sighed in resignation. He asked where Julian was, stating firmly that he was done being a substitute and would not participate in any threesome. It was the mountain of a man who answered, his voice a gravelly bass. "You know me?" Leo stared, utterly dumbfounded. This was the man he supposedly resembled? this rugged, hulking alpha? Apart from both being human males, there was not a single point of comparison. The two men exchanged a look and then stepped apart, revealing Julian Vance leaning against the doorframe, the tips of his ears glowing a guilty red. "I said there was a resemblance," Julian muttered defensively. Suddenly, the boyish man, Connor, doubled over, clutching his neck in pain. The giant, Caleb, instantly scooped him up. He looked at Leo, his expression grim. "Julian's pheromones are leaking," he explained curtly. "Connor's a lower-grade alpha, he can't take the intensity. I'm getting him out of here." With that, he carried Connor out and locked the door from the outside, leaving Leo alone with a very flustered-looking Julian. The truth crashed down on him. It was never about a look-alike. It had all been an elaborate lie. Julian looked at him, his eyes wide and pleading. He asked why Leo had run away, why he had conspired with Harrison to vanish. The raw vulnerability in his voice was disarming, but Leo was furious. He beckoned him closer with a slow, deliberate finger. Julian approached like a chastened dog and knelt by the bed. Leo noticed the faint purple marks of inhibitor injections on his forearm. "Was it fun?" Leo demanded, shoving his hand toward Julian's face to show him the calluses he'd gotten from hauling his payoff in gold. "Was it fun to deceive me?" Julian simply took his hand and pressed his face against it, remaining silent. The next day, determined to get to the bottom of everything, Leo sought out the two brothers. It was Connor who opened the door. He introduced himself properly, explaining he was Caleb's younger cousin, and that they were both alphas. He proceeded to tell Leo their story. They had fallen in love as teenagers, a taboo in their conservative community. It was Julian, their childhood friend, who had created the elaborate fiction of being in love with Caleb to give them cover, allowing them to escape to Europe while he dealt with their families. He had rushed back to the States for a reason he never explained, and they only found out about Leo when they overheard the video call. Connor apologized sincerely for the years Leo had spent caught in their lie. Leo returned to the room where Julian was still resting. He found him awake, putting on a weak act, coughing and asking why Leo had come back. Leo cut through the performance. He told Julian he knew everything. He wasn't a substitute, and Caleb was never his white moonlight. Julian's facade shattered. He grabbed Leo's hand, his voice thick with desperation. "Don't go," he pleaded. Then he asked a question that made no sense. "Do you really not remember me, Leo?" Leo searched his memories, but there was nothing. Julian's face, his presence. It was too distinct to have forgotten. And then Julian began to speak of a rainy afternoon 8 years ago, of a lonely, miserable boy huddled in an alley behind an arcade, soaked to the skin. The boy had just been brought to live with a powerful family he didn't know and was lost and terrified. Another boy had found him there, Leo. Thinking he was just some kid who'd had a rough day, Leo had given him a pack of tissues and a cheap paperback novel he was carrying. An inspirational story about an underdog who becomes a powerful CEO. He had jokingly told the miserable boy that if he ever made it big, he shouldn't forget the kind stranger who helped him. Julian confessed that in his desperate state, he had latched onto the novel's plot, which he had misinterpreted as a blueprint for life, not realizing it was a romance between the CEO and his loyal assistant. He had vowed to become that powerful man so he could come back and keep Leo just like in the story. He admitted he was too ashamed of his former weakness to ever tell Leo the truth. Stunned, Leo stared at him. "The Orchard Estates," he whispered. "Why did you have that built?" Julian's gaze was soft. "You once said you wanted to run away," he explained. "I thought if I built you a home so big it was its own neighborhood, you could never run too far." Tears blurred Leo's vision. He called Julian a fool, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. He declared that from that moment on, Julian's money was his money, and his money was also his money. A slow, brilliant smile spread across Julian's face, washing away years of anxiety. "I understand," Julian said, his voice quiet. Leo leaned in and bit his lip, not hard enough to draw blood. but enough to make a point. "That's so you'll remember," he mumbled against his mouth. Julian chuckled, a sound of pure relief, and pulled him into his arms, his embrace a promise. The love that had been hidden in the pages of a misunderstood story, nurtured in secret for years, had finally found its voice, ready to gentle the rest of their lives.